In this video, you're going to learn 3 ways to make even blends and smoother strokes with your acrylic paint. Now to start out with, I'm going to demonstrate what usually happens as a beginner when you want to blend colors together. Now I've picked up some pink paint on my brush and I've evenly loaded it on my brush, and I'm using back and forth strokes to apply it on my paper here, or you can do on canvas as well. And that back and forth stroke and loading it evenly on your brush is super important when you want to make those even blends. Now I'm going to be picking up a little bit of yellow, so a second color, and I'm going to be now trying to blend those colors together and make a gradient look. So I'm going to be applying it first to the bottom of that pink, and then I'm going to be bringing it back up in hopes that it's going to blend in the middle. But what actually happens here is that the pink underneath has dried before I could get to blend it. Now I'm using those back and forth strokes, which in theory should blend it out, but because the fast drying nature of acrylics, it has dried and I can't blend it and I can't work it. So here, instead of having that even gradient, I have 3 distinct color blocks, that pink, orange, and yellow, and it's not even and graduated. But with the 3 tips I'm going to share with you, we're going to learn how to work with that fast drying time of acrylics and get those smooth and even blends and gradients. So the first trick that I love using is just using a simple water spray bottle, or here I have what's called a mini mister, and it's just the difference between the mini mister and a spray bottle is just the mist of water that comes out is just a little bit more finer, and it gives you a little bit more control over where that water goes and doesn't create a big mess. Now what I usually do is I use the same method of applying the paint on my canvas. This is acrylic paint with nothing added in it, and then once it's added, I spray it or mist it with my spray bottle with water, and this basically reactivates the paint and prevents it from drying too fast, which lets me work it a little bit longer to be able to make sure my strokes are even and you don't see all the brush marks in the paint. And then I can actually grab the next color, which is my yellow, and as you can see right here already, it's blending and the pink underneath hasn't dried, and it's actually blending right on the paper with the yellow paint. So the pink and the yellow are blending right on the paper, and there's no distinct lines anymore, and there's more of a graduation between the pink at the top and then that pink yellow mix, and then here it's going to be more of that pure yellow at the bottom. So again, I'm just going to mist it again with the water, and I'm going to continue blending using those back and forth strokes to keep working that paint. And that water, what that water does, it just prevents it from drying too fast, so I'll keep it wet just a little bit longer for it to work. So as you can see here, the blends are beautiful. With that simple trick of using a spray bottle with water, you can create those seamless, beautiful, streak-free blends. Now the only thing that I've noticed with the water trick is that sometimes you can dilute the pigment and you can lose some of the vibrancy of your paints because water does dilute the paint down. So because of that, I have added a couple more tricks. If you want to keep the vibrancy of your paint and not to worry about that, then the next trick coming up is going to help you keep the vibrancy while still blending and make those awesome blends. Now to quickly compare the both, we have our spray bottle trick blending on the left, and then our original blending work we did on the right. And here you can see the distinct color blocks, and it's not smooth, and you can see the streaks in it. And then on the left, it's very smooth and graduated. Now the second trick is using a gloss glazing medium mixed right in with your acrylic paint, and this allows you to avoid using water and diluting your pigment in your paint and losing that vibrancy. So if you want to keep that vibrancy and not have to add the water, then adding a gloss glazing liquid, this one's made by Golden, but I believe other companies have them as well. Adding this right in with your acrylic paints before you start will extend the drying time of the acrylic right on your canvas and also on your palette too. Now I know there's some mediums out there that are actually called the slow drying medium. I haven't tried using those because I found the instructions a little bit more complicated. You have to add the exact ratio from medium to acrylic paint, and I like to take the path of least resistance. So this gloss glazing liquid, you just add it in any ratio. You don't have to worry about measuring or anything. You add it right into your acrylic paint and it does the trick. So out of pure simplicity, I just chose the gloss glazing liquid and I absolutely loved working with it because it's so super easy to use. Now I also find because it has a slight glossy sheen at the end, it actually accentuates the vibrancy of your colors even more, and it gives a slight glossy sheen. Now I think there is a matte medium as well if you don't want the gloss, so there's different finishes for the glazing liquid. Now all you do here is once you've mixed it well in with your paints, then you're just going to grab it like you usually do with your brush, and you're going to add it directly on your canvas or on your paper with those same back and forth strokes. So you can keep working your paint and smoothing out those brush marks and strokes, and it's going to stay wet. You don't have to worry about it drying on you. When you're going to grab the second color, it's going to stay wet right on your canvas. So here I'm grabbing my yellow paint now, and as you can see here, I'm not spraying it with the water bottle, and I'm just going to be adding the yellow right on, and it's going to blend right on my paper here as well, like it did with the spray bottle trick. And this is going to give us again that seamless blend, and as you can see here already, it's the vibrancy of the paints are a lot more bright and saturated than they are with you can see the spray bottle blends we did on the left, and the colors are just a lot more vibrant, which is why I love to use the gloss glazing liquid as well, especially when I want my paintings to have that really pop of color and not to lose the vibrancy. So you can continue picking up more color on your paintbrush. So here I'm adding more of that yellow, so you can see that graduation between the magenta at the top and then that orange yellow mix between the two paints in the middle, and then the more of the pure yellow at the bottom. And there's no three distinct color blocks. It's very graduated and subtle. So you might be also wondering, well, how long does it take to dry? Now, if you've ever worked with oil paints, it can take days or months for the oil paint to dry, and this gloss glazing liquid is not going to extend it to that extent. So this is going to stay wet on your canvas for just a little bit longer, like a few minutes extra, but nothing like oil paints where it stays wet for days and weeks or months. So you can still continue if you are working with a lot of layers, you can still work with layers in a reasonable amount of time and not have to wait too long. And you can also use like a hair dryer or a heat gun over top of your paint to make it dry faster if it's taking too long to dry. And one of the things I like to emphasize when blending paint and creating that streak-free look is to keep working that paint. So that's why I'm using the gloss glazing liquid, or I use the spray bottle trick. Those two liquids allow the acrylic paint to stay wet for longer on your canvas, so you can work it. So the water alone and the gloss glazing liquid alone is not going to blend your paint. You have to work it with your brush, and you want to use that horizontal back and forth stroke to keep working it. And then when you're happy with the blends and your color application, then you can stop at that point. The third trick is using a mop brush in combination with having our gloss glazing liquid in our paints. Now, mop brushes are used for blending work, and they're not used like traditional brushes where you dip it in water to wet beforehand. Mop brushes, when used for blending, is used dry, and that's what gives the mop brush the ability to blend those and smooth those edges out and give those even blends. So here I'm just going to be adding on my paint with my brush as I did in the previous two steps, but the difference here is I'm not overly working it because I know I'm going to come back later on and work my blends and my strokes with my mop brush. Another thing to note is these mop brushes come in different sizes. So for example, if you're blending paint on a really large canvas, then you want to get a larger mop brush to do that job. Now, if you want to blend smaller details on a smaller canvas, then that bigger brush is just not going to do it for you. You're going to need something smaller. And in that case, they do sell mop brushes that are for more of that detailed, smaller area blending. You just have to look out for it at your local craft store or even online. I'm going to add a link in the description below for the mop brush that I'm using, but feel free to go and just take a look at your local craft store and see what the sizes are. It's just much easier to see in person how the size works. Online it can be a little bit tricky to kind of gauge how big they are. Another thing to remember when wanting to get those even blends and gradients is to be working with an optimal paint consistency. So for example, if you're working with acrylic paint that's heavy bodied, meaning it's really thick out of the tube, and then you try to grab that on your brush, it can go on to your surface really gloopy and prevent you from getting those even blends and smooth strokes. So I often suggest to thin down acrylic paint to a point where it's an optimal paint consistency. Now, I kind of described this paint consistency like a thick ink, and another fellow artist that I follow actually described it like a thick gravy, and I absolutely love that description because it's much easier to visualize gravy than a thick ink. So yeah, you want to thin your paint down with either water or with your gloss glazing liquid. Now, I like the gloss glazing liquid because it doesn't water down your pigments and you don't lose that vibrancy. So since I'm using the gloss glazing liquid in my acrylic paints here, I'm not worried too much about them drying overly fast. So that's why I'm applying all the colors and then I'm going to go over it with my brush. But if you don't have that, then you want to do your blends as you go with your brush. So here I have my mop brush, and what I'm going to do is completely dry. There's no moisture at all on it. And I'm just going to go over those areas where it's more of a distinct block of color. And I'm going to go over it with like that back and forth stroke and just like almost pretend like you're sweeping some dust off of your paper, and you're just going to keep on working it over and over again. Another helpful tip is to clean off your brush every so often, especially if you're blending multiple colors together. You don't want to create mud on your canvas or paper. So all you would do is clean it off in some water and then dry off the brush as best as you can. If there's a little bit moisture left on the brush, that's okay, but try to get most of that moisture out, and then you can continue reworking it. So now let's compare all 4 blends. So the first one we did was, it looks a little bit more streaky. You can see the paint strokes, and also the colors look more blocky and not as graduated. Now in the second, the blending work we did, we used a spray bottle trick with a simple mini mister or a simple spray bottle. And then the third method we used a gloss glazing liquid, added in right into our acrylic paints, and the blends are looking very beautiful and vibrant. And finally, the last trick we did was using the gloss glazing liquid paired with a mop brush to make those seamless blends, and that is equally as beautiful too. Now, I think they all work great. It's definitely a personal preference which one you like to use. I would suggest trying all 3 methods and then seeing which one works best for you.